Why will the trust fund likely tap out? Recall the reason. Because people don't really put money into their own Social Security pensions. Their personal contributions essentially go for people in their parents' or grandparents' generation. Adults really put babies into the system. The main reason there will be relatively few dollars in the trust fund in the next century is because so few babies, relatively, will have been born during the years of the birth dearth. Not enough birth dearth babies to support the aged babies of the baby boom. Not enough babies, not enough money. Now suppose that bonus of $2,000 per year for each new baby will encourage some couples to have an extra baby. For 16 years, that new baby will be pulling cash out of the trust fund. $32,000 in all. That's a debit against the trust fund. And to it must be added the interest that the fund could draw from government bonds, with those spent dollars in the fund had held on to them. If the fund had held on to them. Excuse me. But at about age 20 or so, that extra bought baby will typically go to work, and work for about 45 or 50 years. Oh my god, excuse me. The average amount of Social Security funds those babies, now adults, would then put into the system would probably run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, dependent on future pay scales, inflation rates, and unemployment rates. In short, although such a plan will draw down the fund in the early years, it could replenish, more than replenish, or partly replenish, the fund by yielding up new producers at just about the time they are needed. That is, when the trust fund is running dry and the baby boomers start needing retirement funds. Some of the key questions are these. How many extra babies will how many bonus dollars per year actually yield? Could the plan pay for itself? How much is an extra baby worth to the U.S.? And the straight answers to all these questions is this. No one knows. The economic and fertility variables are too many, and the potential number and level of schemes infinite. My sense of the matter is that some sort of plan using trust fund dollars could be worked out that could approach economic break-even. Perhaps the bonus would have to be less than $2,000. Perhaps it would be paid out only for 10 years, or 5 rather than 16. Perhaps it would not be offered to the offspring of non-married mothers. Another very controversial thought that I'm not at all sure I favor. And if it still doesn't add up, then what? We have to think hard about taxing ourselves extra to make it work. Remember what we're trying to do. Prop up the West, keep the American economy vigorous, and diminish human unhappiness. Let's pay for it if we have to. Suppose such a plan only increased birth by about 5%. Let's say 1 out of 20 women would decide to have an extra child because of our new child allowance system. If that's what happens, it would add about 175,000 births per year. That would raise American fertility by about 1.8 to 1.9%. Sorry, mosquito. It would add about 11 million Americans to the population by the middle of the next century, and go a long way toward preventing an eventual decline. Admittedly, this is a gargantuan plan. Perhaps we'll have to think smaller. And while on the subject of Social Security, something smaller comes to mind. Remember our earlier dictum. We don't put dollars into our Social Security accounts. We put in babies. The dollars young and middle-aged workers put into Social Security go to their parents and grandparents, or people in those generations. The money we receive when we are at retirement age comes from our children, and our grandchildren, or from someone else's. Such is the nature of pay-as-you-go Social Security plans. Consequently, people who have no children, or perhaps only one child, are in a sense cheating the system. They are free riders. Excuse you. They end up drawing full pensions paid for by children who are raised and reared at a large expense by children of other people. That's not fair. Bitch. Couples without children have extra discretionary income while they are young, which they can invest for their retirement. That is not the case for many couples rearing young children at a time when schooling and housing are felt to be particularly costly. Yet childless people get full Social Security retirement benefits when they are older, paid for by other people's children, raised by parents who are almost always short of money. Can this fact be used in trying to design a small piece of a plausible pronatalist policy? Perhaps it can. Remember, one of the oldest explanations for falling fertility is that, as a society modernizes, urbanizes, and creates pension schemes, children become of less economic value to parents. They are not needed to do chores on the family farm. Later on, they are not needed to support their parents in their sunset years. A nice green check from Uncle Sam, often augmented by private plans and private savings, takes care of the elderly. But, as we have seen, even fertility goes too low. The human chain letter game called Social Security... What? When fertility goes too low, the human chain letter game called Social Security doesn't work well. Okay. Suppose, in order to boost fertility, we considered humanely and unanimously relinking the ancient bond between having children and having security in our old age. One obvious way to do that in a way that would encourage fertility would be to legislate a change in the Social Security... Legislate a change in the Social Security tax. It would involve a simple change in the FICA box on the W-4 payroll form. Persons who have no children would have more money deducted from their check. People with one child would have less deducted. Those with two children still less, and so on. If the rates were widely scaled, such a program would be quite fair, as well as pro-natalist. It would be one more economic incentive to boost fertility. If you have more children, there will be more left in your paycheck. It would also probably be a political disaster. People whose rates would be raised would scream bloody murder. Congress would quickly collapse under pressure, but perhaps the deed could be done somewhat painlessly. For Social Security taxes, Social Security taxes are slated to raise in steps in the years to come, from a maximum of $4,788 in 1986 to $5,208 in 2000, indexed for inflation. Suppose you kept that already legislated raise in effect, but exempted from the raise any person with two or more children, or even cut their rate. That would leave the no-child and one-child payers paying substantially more for Social Security tax than those payers with two or more children. The result is somewhat the same as the earlier model. The no-child and one-child payers would pay more than the bigger family units, but because the taxes are already legislated, it would be done in a way that might avoid a political bloodbath. Of course, under such a plan, the Social Security Trust Fund could once again be temporarily shortchanged. But, as has been explored here and many times, pro-natalism involving money can only work if the money is big money. The useful myth we call the Social Security Trust Fund, which is really not a separate fund, nor is it in trust, is the easiest source of big money around. And if more babies are the result, the fund may well be partially or totally repaid, just when it needs it. If not, we'll just have to pay taxes in the future for our pronatalism now. We need the babies more than the money.
That's creepy!
Yeah, but babies cost a lot of money, bitch. Like, what the... I need babies, not money. You need money to raise babies.
It's about keeping the flesh running the system. It doesn't really matter if you're starving while you have your kids, I guess.
Yeah, but he doesn't want poor people having kids.
Well, he's being colorblind. You know what he means when he says poor.
I know what he means. But he's still being stupid.
Yeah. It's crazy and psychotic.
It should be added here that such pro-natalist ideas also make a great deal of sense in their own right. Not as pro-natalism, but as sound social policy. In recent years, it has become clear that our major social problems revolve around our child problem. My colleague Carl Zinsmeister has made the point that in recent years, children have lost out in the race for federal help. In the 70s, the elderly got disproportionate shares of government monies. In the 80s, middle-aged people of the upper middle and upper classes did well with tax cuts. Children have been shortchanged, and the poverty data show clearly that they are in poverty far disproportionate to their numbers. They are today the most in need of help. The preceding speculations, and that's all they are keyed to the American situation. But most Western nations are in a similar situation. The pension funds are fat now, slated to get fatter as their baby boomers mature, and destined for deep trouble as the baby boomers reach retirement age. At that time, low birth dearth cohorts will be footing the bill at enormous cost to themselves, or refusing to pay the costs and enormous costs to the elderly. The European nations devote more monies to pro-natalist policies than Americans do, but still a relatively small percentage of their gross national product compared to Eastern Europe. The West Europeans, like us, should think about tapping their pension trust funds now in order to boost the levels of pro-natalist policies, in order to raise fertility, and in order to provide more pension payers later. That may turn out to be the best way to save their pension systems and their countries. Remember, the Western European average TFR is, 1.6 children per woman. Well over than the 1.8 in the US. Moreover, those rates apply to essentially non-pro-list countries that do not accept immigrants easily. In short, Social Security is a Ponzi game, a pyramid scheme, a chain letter, the most elemental one in life. Grown children help support their aged parents. It works fine, wonderfully, as long as it is stoked by new players, children. When fertility falls drastically, the society has broken the ancient rules of the Ponzi pyramid, but it possibly can be restored by using present resources for future benefits. In the financial community, there is a word for that process. It is called investment. A business analogy is appropriate. When inflating rates were very high a few years ago, interest rates soared. Some businessmen were advised, don't invest in new capital equipment. You can get a better return by putting accrued earnings in a money market fund. That strategy may have had a short-term appeal, but most businessmen understood sooner or later that they were not in the money market business. Suppose you were a lumber company executive. You could take your available investment and get a 14% return from short-term financial investments, or you could invest the money in pine seedlings, which would take, say, 20 years to mature into sellable lumber, with an annualized 20-year return of, say, 10%, as opposed to the short-term securities yield of 14%. What would you do? If you want to stay in the lumber business, about which you allegedly know something, you'd better plant the seedlings. So too with the Social Security system, and with the nation as a whole. The surplus of the Social Security Trust Fund can be directed by Congress to be invested in government bonds, drawing interest in a government-to-government bookkeeping transaction, hoarding its nest egg in order to be able to pay out pensions and probably medical insurance, but ultimately depleting itself away anyway. Or it can be directed to use that money to try to help ensure that Social Security does not run out of seed corn. That is, by helping to provide the next generations of payers and players for the system. And it goes further than that. In the US and in Western Europe, a large investment in baby bonuses can pay off not only by saving pension plans, important, but by helping to save what has come to be known as Western civilization. Very important. There are lots of other little ways to... Whoa! There are lots of other little ways to skin this cat.
Oh, nice.
It may be that the most anti-natalist federal activity is in the realm of aid to college education. These days, most student financing comes from guaranteed loans, not grants, and about a third to a half of undergraduates leave school in debt. The average amount owed is almost $9,000 for private school college graduates and $7,000 for public school college graduates. The sums are rising. This means that even if a young couple wanted to have children early in life, they might well delay until they could repay their loans, which could take many years. Recommendation: devise a schedule whereby a graduate who has a baby can have some of the loan forgiven and all of it postponed, interest-free. Another idea: establish daycare IRAs. Let young couples put non-taxable money into an investment account to be drawn upon when a child is born, thereby diminishing the economic loss that occurs when a new mother loses her job. As I have discussed these various money transfer programs with Washington policymakers, I have sometimes received a sharp reaction from some puristic conservatives. Translated, it goes something like this: "Ugh, more big government, me no like." Or, "That's what McGovern wanted, $1,000 demo grant, no good." Well, yes, sort of. A child allowance would end up sending a green federal check to the parents of every child in America, much as almost every elderly person gets a green Social Security check. Indeed, that can be said to be bigger government. On the other hand, if the payments are fairly large, which they must be for it to work, these payments could be used to phase out scores of targeted social welfare programs, each with large bureaucracies. If you give parents of poor children enough real green cash money, you may lessen or eliminate scores of programs.